When we think of the Underground Railroad, we usually picture secret passages and daring midnight escapes. And yeah, that's part of it. But the real story is so much bigger. We're going to go beyond the folklore and look at this for what it was: an absolutely brilliant and sophisticated network of mass civil disobedience built from the ground up to defy an unjust system. So I want you to start with this question. Just think about it for a second. Because for thousands of Americans, both black and white, this wasn't some thought experiment. It was their daily reality. It was a choice they had to make, an impossible choice between following the law and following their own conscience. All right, before we can even begin to talk about the escape, we have to understand the prison. And I don't just mean slavery itself. I mean the legal cage that was built around it. The Underground Railroad was a direct response to a set of laws specifically designed to make freedom an impossibility. And here's the crazy part. The foundation for all of this was built right into the U.S. Constitution. Look at the language here: person held to service or labor. They wouldn't even use the word slave. But this little clause made it clear. There was no such thing as a truly free state. An enslaver's right to his property could cross any border in the country. Then, in 1793, they put teeth into that clause. This act created a federal process for the hunt. An alleged fugitive could be captured anywhere, dragged before a judge, and sent back to slavery with barely any proof. They had no right to a jury trial. And here's the kicker: if you were caught helping them, you faced a $500 fine, which was a fortune back then. The law was literally designed to criminalize compassion.
So what do you do when the system is stacked against you like that? Well, you create your own system. And this is where the story gets truly incredible. In the face of this legal machine, a resistance network started to form. Let's break down the anatomy of how this whole thing worked.
First up, you have the conductors. These were the guides on the ground, the ones leading people or passengers through swamps and forests, almost always at night. The whole operation used this railroad terminology. Passengers, cargo, stations. It was all a brilliant code to keep their communications secret. So where were the conductors taking these passengers? They were heading to stations, which were basically safe houses run by station masters. These could be attics, hidden rooms, cellars, and barns, anywhere someone could be hidden safely. These people provided food, medicine, and shelter, forming the backbone of the entire network. They were the critical infrastructure that made these impossible journeys possible.
And the genius didn't stop there. I mean, how do you pass along critical information when you can't read or write, and speaking freely could get you killed? You hide messages in plain sight. Spirituals became this incredible form of coded communication. An overseer just heard a religious song, but enslaved people heard a plan. Wade in the water meant get to a river to throw the dogs off your trail. Follow the drinking gourd. That was a literal map using the Big Dipper to find the North Star. Just brilliant.
Now, of course, we have to talk about the most famous conductor of all, Harriet Tubman. The legends about her are epic, but honestly, the documented facts are even more impressive. She wasn't just some folk hero running around. She was a brilliant covert operator. She didn't go all over the South. She focused on Maryland's Eastern Shore, a place she knew like the back of her hand. And that famous $40,000 bounty? A myth. The real reward was $100, which actually proves how good she was. They barely even knew who they were looking for. And that brings us to this number, 70. That's how many people, mostly her own family and friends, Harriet Tubman personally guided to freedom. And on top of that, she gave detailed instructions to at least 70 more who escaped on their own. These weren't random trips. These were carefully planned, high-stakes missions, executed with the precision of a military strategist. Okay, so the railroad is working. It's working so well, in fact, that it's starting to cause real financial damage to enslavers. And when a system like that feels threatened, it doesn't give up, it fights back. And it fought back with a law that was far more terrifying than anything that came before. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 was the old law on steroids. Now the full power of the federal government, U.S. Marshals, was involved. An accused person couldn't even testify in their own defense. But here's the most shocking part. Ordinary citizens in the North could be forced, by law, to join a posse and hunt down fugitives. Suddenly, you couldn't just stay neutral. The law forced you to be either a collaborator or a criminal. The penalties for helping also went way up. The fine jumped to $1,000. Now, to put that in perspective, that's like getting hit with a $30,000 bill today. It was a direct attack designed to bankrupt anyone sympathetic to the cause. And if the money wasn't enough to scare you,
How about this? For the first time, you could be sent to federal prison for 6 months. Just for giving a starving person a piece of bread, you could end up in jail. The risk for anyone involved for any act of compassion just skyrocketed.
And if you think it couldn't get more corrupt, get this. The law literally built in a bribe. The federal commissioners who heard these cases got paid based on their decision. If they ruled to send someone back into slavery, they got paid $10. If they ruled to set them free, they only got $5. The system was financially incentivized to deny freedom. It's just unbelievable.
But here is the beautiful irony. This law, the one designed to crush the Underground Railroad for good, it backfired. Big time. Instead of killing the movement, it just made people in the North angrier. It made the railroad more organized, and it forced them to find new, even more ambitious routes to freedom.
And this is a part of the story that most of us never learned in school. We're taught that the railroad only went north, right? Follow the North Star. But that's not the whole picture. For people in Texas or Louisiana, Canada was impossibly far. So where did they go? South, to Mexico. For people near the coast, they went east, by boat, to the Caribbean. It was a multi-directional exodus. And these weren't just random destinations. This was a calculated geopolitical strategy. The people running and using the railroad knew that Britain had abolished slavery in 1834, and Mexico had done it even earlier, in 1829. They understood that if they could just make it to one of these places, they were no longer property under U.S. law. They were legally free human beings. So what was the impact of this shift? Well, the numbers are just staggering. In the 10 years after the 1850 law passed, somewhere between 30 and 40,000 freedom seekers settled in Canada alone. The law that was meant to stop the flow north had created a massive flood. Canada became the true promised land. So when you put it all together, you realize the Underground Railroad was so much more than an escape route. It was one of the most powerful, organized, and sustained acts of mass civil disobedience in American history. It was a movement that looked at an unjust federal law and said simply, no. And that brings us right back to that first question, doesn't it? The thousands of people who made the Underground Railroad work, the conductors, the station masters, and most of all, the passengers themselves. They all answered that question. They answered it with their actions, risking their lives and their liberty, day after day. It really makes you think, what lines would we be willing to cross for the freedom of another?